These are sobering things, but they're important things. Because what's our goal? As Christians, our goal is not just to have changed behavior, right? That's not our goal. Changed behavior is good. If you decide, I'm not going to kill someone, that's better than killing someone. But you know what's better than not killing someone? Loving them, right? Supernatural change, heart change, agape care for another human being. And that's what we're being called to, and that's supernatural. But he's going to go on, and he makes kind of some weird statements for us, because he says there in verse 5, you are to deliver this man to Satan, okay, for the destruction of the flesh, so that his spirit may be saved in the day of the Lord. Now, this is widely debated and disputed what this means. Some people say, smart people, they say, well, because the word sarka is also linked with destruction, that this is probably, because sarka in the New Testament is sometimes used for the word body. It means dead flesh is what it means. That's why we get our word sarcophagus, a holder for dead flesh, right? So some people look at this and they say, well, this is the idea that you put a person out from the church, and what happens is they lose kind of this supernatural covering that God has for his people, and they kind of get delivered to Satan, and that he can just have his way with them. Other people say, no, this is still, because up until this point in 1 Corinthians, the vast majority of times that the word sarka or sarx in the Greek is used, it's always a reference, or almost always a reference to the old nature, our Adamic nature. And so from that perspective, they say, no, it's the idea that you put a person out, and so they lose the benefits of being at a church gathering and with church people, and they're ultimately left to their own devices and essentially to Satan. Now, we know that Satan is called the prince of the power of the air, the god of this world, right? From Ephesians, was that 2? I can't remember. Anyway, we know he says, we're told the whole world lies in the arms of the wicked one. We know that Satan, also in Ephesians 2, is the pneuma, or the spirit that blows, the wind that blows in the sons of disobedience, that he's impacting people, and he's able to bring people along in kind of this demonic plan. So we know that that's all going on. I would, if it's just by opinion, I do not think that the concept of God's covering, being in fellowship, is necessarily the issue. Because I know a lot of people who love Jesus and get cancer and die. I know people that love Jesus and get in car accidents. I know people that are serving Christ with their whole life and they get murdered. So I think we have to be very careful in projecting this idea that if I'm a good Christian in fellowship, that I'm somehow immune to this broken world. I don't think that's true. In fact, I think really the strength of the Christian is not the absence of difficulty, it's the strength in difficulty. I think that that's the strength of the Christian. Not having to worry about difficulty versus always trying to get out of difficulty. I think that's how I would look at it. But I think what happens is, and what's being communicated, I would agree with the latter, and the idea here is this, that if you come to church, if you have a half-decent church, it's kind of a nice place to come, right? Because you walk in, you get some live music, even if you're not a big worshiper. You get coffee. Sometimes there's meals. Typically, there's reasonably nice people at church, right? It can be a good place to come, right? You feel acceptance at church, hopefully. You feel welcome at church, all these things. And so what this does to excommunicate someone, it takes them from all that blessing. It's to literally say, like any good parent would, you don't get to do all this destructive stuff and experience all the blessing. You just don't get it. And so it's to the destruction of the sinful nature. Not that suffering can annihilate the sinful nature, but suffering has a way of sobering a person and causing them to counter their days, doesn't it? I am convinced that in unbelievers, and I don't say this with any kind of malicious intent or any kind of sadistic thoughts, but I am convinced that a cancer diagnosis is one of the most merciful things that can happen to an unbeliever, because it instantaneously forces them to consider something that most of us run from our entire lives. I am going to die. It's amazing how many, you've heard the saying, there are no atheists in foxholes. It's amazing when we endure suffering or something happens to us, how open we suddenly become to the supernatural. And how the witness of creation and whatever light we've received over the course of our life all of a sudden comes piercing through into our hearts and causes us to address our souls and our decisions. So I'm convinced personally, and we can disagree, I'll still love you, but personally I'm convinced that it's not like there's some removal of this miraculous protection and now you're going to get in a motorcycle accident if you fornicate. It's more the idea that you get removed from the most blessed thing on the planet. That's what church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a place where we all come together like-minded, loving one another, caring for one another, supporting one another, listening to God's word together, searching for God, communing with God, worshiping God together. It's the one place on the planet where people are supposed to be able to walk in and immediately find spiritual healing. Sometimes physical healing, definitely emotional healing. That's what it's supposed to be.